At some point, every leader faces a moment where the most important thing they could do is say the thing they haven't been saying. It could be at work, at home, in a partnership, in a negotiation. Most of the time, they just don't say it. They know exactly what it is. They just keep finding reasons why now is not quite the right moment. If we haven't met, I'm Chris Quintana. I work one-on-one with business owners and executives on high-performance leadership around clarity, energy, courage, and influence. Today, I'm thinking out loud about the courage it takes to have the conversations that matter most. And not just once when the pressure gets high, but as a way of showing up consistently with the people who deserve your full self. That includes you. So let's talk about having these hard conversations. I remember pretty early on in my marriage, I was having a conversation with my therapist. I was continually angry at my husband about the same thing. Probably the fact that he wasn't cleaning up the house the way I wanted him to. It was early on in my marriage, like I said. And I remember talking to my therapist about how I know we can't change other people. And I really knew that no matter how many times I asked, he wasn't really going to change who he was on this particular matter. And I was angry about it and didn't know what to do with it. And she asked me why I hadn't talked to him about it. And I said, well, what's the point? What is the point of telling someone you're angry if you're not expecting them to change? And what she said was connection. That the point of having the hard conversation, telling the truth about who you are and how you're feeling, is to tell the truth and make a connection with someone. They're in charge of how they take it. But if we don't tell them, they don't have an opportunity. And, I'd love to, looking back on this, tell you that I took her advice. I had the conversation. It went great. And lo and behold, she started cleaning things up. Honestly, I don't remember if I had the conversation. I eventually did because we talk about it all the time. We talk about that lessons. I know I've eventually had that conversation. And he does do a whole lot more cleaning up, but I don't think it happened overnight. And it wasn't the point of the conversation. And I think a lot of times we avoid hard conversations because either we're afraid of hurting someone else, we're afraid of getting hurt, or we're afraid of being disappointed by the outcome. And so, it's interesting because I'm listening to what I'm saying right now, and what's coming up is somehow communication seems transactional. I'm here doing this video, you're watching the video because we want something from each other. And either you're going to get it and you're going to give me what I want, or you're not going to get it and you're not going to give me what I want, but that's not really true. I haven't been doing this every week for the last 3.5 months just because of what I'm getting back from it. I have been doing this every week for the last 3 months because I'm hoping that some point someone's going to stumble across one of these videos and it's going to be helpful when they really need it. So those hard conversations that we don't want to have, there's a lot of different types. They could be business-wise, they could be personal. They're not always hard because it's a bad thing either. Sometimes the conversations are hard. Again, if you're worried about being disappointed in the outcome not being what you're expecting, then you might not want to have easy conversations either. Right. So that's really where this is coming from. And those are the types of conversations that we're having. And it is important for us to learn how to have the hard conversations because it can really get in our way when we aren't willing. So I gave you a personal example. Here's a business example. I think I might have mentioned this one on an early video because it just stuck in my head. I know someone who had an employee. They hired someone, and in the first month, the person did a great job. Then as things started moving on, they started to realize that this person might not actually know what they were doing as well as they said. Things were stalling. They were not taking notes. They were not remembering processes. They weren't asking questions they needed to ask. They were just trying to make it look like they were doing better than they really should. And so this person was talking to me about needing to fire their employee, but it was coming up on the holidays, so she didn't want to do it. And then the holidays came and went, and something else came up, and she didn't want to do it. She ended up letting that person stay on board for another year until the person decided to leave. And when they were looking to replace that person and started getting into the work, they realized how bad it was and how many mistakes had been made and the kind of problems business-wise that happened because the boss was never willing to have the conversation and say, you're underperforming. These are my expectations. This is what I want to see. I think they maybe had it once and then didn't follow up on it because it's really uncomfortable. We don't want to hurt someone's feelings. In some way, it feels like you're protecting someone by not having the hard conversation, but you're really not, because it doesn't help them, and it certainly doesn't help you to be holding on to something that you don't want to be holding on to, right? So where does that come from? Where does that holding back come from? I think it comes from an environment that taught us that who we are is not okay. And that environment could have been in your childhood. It could have been in your adulthood. It might have been a bully at school or an experience on a sports team. It could have happened in an earlier job, or maybe the business that we're in right now. But something happened that felt like rejection, or being picked on, or being chastised, being corrected publicly. Most of the time, it probably wasn't personal, but it felt personal. And all of that makes us want to hold back on letting people know who we really are. And when we're willing to let people know who we really are, we can stand for what we believe in. We can set and graciously enforce boundaries. We can ask for what we need. We can grow. We can help others grow when we're in an environment where we feel safe and comfortable and confident enough to be our full selves. It's easier to have this communication. And sometimes we need to change the environment that we're in, whether it's leaving and going to a new situation or making changes in the situation, changing the environment. Sometimes it's just changing the internal and not the external. I think may have shared this before too. One of the ways that we can shift that environment is curiosity. So if we look back at that conversation I just was talking about with my therapist about sharing when I'm angry, sharing my emotions for the sake of connecting and sharing, one of the things that can help with that is a sense of curiosity. So I remember working with someone who was really triggery for me, and I couldn't figure out why. And there were times when I knew I was triggered, and I knew this is such an out of proportion response. And I just remember talking to people over and over. I don't know what it is about this person. They just get to me. And one day I had been listening to a webinar or a podcast the night before that had talked about this. And so then the next day I'm at work and something happens. My boss says the same kind of thing, and I was really innocuous, and I got totally triggered. And I remember I just walked into the bathroom because I needed to get away. I didn't want to say something I was going to regret, and I was really annoyed. And I remember washing my hands and looked in the mirror and went, I'm really, really upset right now. Isn't that interesting? I wonder what that's about. And that curiosity helped me to let go of what I was feeling. And suddenly what I realized maybe 5 or 10 minutes later was she reminded me of my mom, and I was reacting to something from my childhood. And I thought, man, I'm not a teenager. I don't need to act like a teenager. I can let this go. And in that case, there was no conversation that needed to be had, which is what this episode is supposed to be about. But that is still an example of changing the environment and letting me know. And I do think it's important for us to know the difference between when we want to hold our tongue and when we really need to speak up. And that's something I'm going to get to in a couple of minutes. But before I get there, I want to talk about the real cost of holding back. when we let our old patterns run us, when we are afraid to say what needs to be said to someone, whether it's a positive or a negative thing. One of the things that happens is we end up with less connection, and that's a personal thing. Whether it happens at work or not, it impacts us personally, because when you're not connected, when you don't feel like you have connections, you don't feel like you have support, you're in this alone. And when you're in this alone, everything is harder. One of the biggest things that I see, what are we, 2026? So 6 years later. Wow, it's April of 2026. It really is 6 years later from the pandemic. 6 years later, one of the biggest societal symptoms of the COVID pandemic that I see is this lack of connection. Being able to work from home is great, but there are people that never leave their houses, that who only interact on screen. And for some people, maybe that's better than what they had to do before. And for some people, that feels very isolating. And I think that isolation and that loneliness and that lack of connection is the price we pay. It's one of the prices we pay when we are unable to honestly communicate about who we are and what we need. Another thing that happens, and this one is, I mean, they're both kind of heartbreaking, in a professional sense. I want you to think about a big dream that you had but no longer have. Maybe you wanted to be a speaker on stage. Well, that's me, but maybe you wanted to be a speaker. Maybe you wanted to start an ice cream shop, open a bookstore, have your own business. And you had plans and you had a vision and you didn't know how to get there. And you knew somebody who could help, but you weren't willing to ask because insert your reason why. So what happened to that dream? For me, that's one of the most disappointing things to see in other people. When I hear people talk about something that lights them up, and then you say, why aren't you pursuing it? Oh, well, I tried it over here and it didn't work. And it turns out that the reason it didn't work is they tried to do it by themselves without enlisting the help of anybody that they knew, without enrolling the cooperation of anybody that could help them. And we see this so often in service-based people, coaches, consultants, designers, lawyers, accountants, bookkeeper, anyone who has a service-based business who has to market what they do. There's this fear, this resistance to telling the truth about what you can do for someone. It feels transactional. This is what I was talking about before. And because of that sense of transactionalism, is that a word? We hold back and we don't share enough. And what we really need, any one of us in any venture, what we really need is support. And it's a shame because sometimes we reach out to the people who we think are going to support us the most easily, and they don't, because they don't see it. And because that happened with the wrong person, we shut down and we don't reach out to anyone else. And the cost of that is giving up your dream. And that to me is one of the biggest heartbreaks that I can imagine in life, is giving up on something because I wasn't willing to share and tell the truth. Now, there is also a time and a place. There are some things that aren't ready to be shared. And maybe they're ready to be shared with a small group, but not publicly. That's another thing I find really interesting, is that some of us are willing to share things publicly. Maybe we shouldn't, but we're not willing to share those same things privately with the people who actually would support us and can help us get to where we want to be. So that might look like not being able to tell someone what you do, not being willing to go to a networking event. It might look like, I know a guy. I am trying to remember. I had an adult student many years ago. His kids are now grown, but they were very young when they were in my program. So it was probably 18, 20 years ago. Dang, I'm old. He was a fantastic business person. So many of us respected him for what he knew and he saw things so differently. And I was so grateful that he was a very approachable, warm, easygoing person, because I actually didn't feel shy about taking him to lunch and saying, I have this idea. I don't know if it's a good one. I wanted to run some things by you and get your input. And he would take this little thing and make it so big. And I wonder sometimes where I would have been if I hadn't been willing to have those conversations with him. And I think that it is so important that we're able to do that we can find the people that we trust, that we can trust ourselves to know that we can do this. So I think, like I said, the real cost of not expressing ourselves is that lack of connection and that possibility of dreams dying before they get off the ground. Whoops, sorry, bug. So the real shift then is, well, what would authentic expression look like in practice? Is it always telling the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God? Is it, my mom used to say, communication is the responsibility of the sender, but she also said we're not responsible for how other people receive it. So my mom's rule was tell the truth no matter what. Doesn't matter how they take it. I'm a very literal person, and those two things didn't work for me, because if it's my responsibility, I have to take the responsibility to communicate clearly, politely, encouragingly. There's a word I'm looking for. I can't find it. Compassionately, communicate compassionately. That's the word. But at the same time, we aren't going to be able to control how people respond. And I think the lesson she was trying to teach me might have been that it's okay. We don't have to protect people from the truth. We just have to speak it clearly, kindly, and when it's of value. So when I think about what authentic expression looks like, for me, it's feeling safe enough to be able to ask the question, make the pitch, or share the vision. And again, feeling safe enough is one part. What environment am I in? Who are the people I have chosen to keep around me? And it's also one part, how well do I know myself? How honest am I being with me? And what am I willing to ask for? I also think part of it is, like I said, knowing the difference between right timing and avoidance. There is a time and a place for things. I have a newish client who I recently realized is pretty racist, and it makes me very uncomfortable. And the truth so far is she hasn't yet said anything in front of anyone else. She's just said things between the two of us. And so since I am not perceiving anyone as yet as being harmed by it, and because this is a new client and we are establishing our professional relationship, I haven't said anything yet. But at some point I will. And I trust that I'll know when that point is, and that I'll be able to do it in a way that's kind and caring and hopefully can be received. And if not, at least I will know I haven't compromised myself by not saying anything. Another thing that I find really valuable in terms of what authentic expression looks like in practice is having the right people around you. I have a core group of friends that we love to get together a couple times a month, usually sharing a meal, a barbecue. We'll sit around and just talk all day. and we have we have come from a lot of different backgrounds. We have some very important things in common, and we see things and have differently and have very different lived experiences from each other. And this particular group of people is so willing to disagree and discuss and stay friends. And there are certain things we know. I'm not saying that to that person because that's not a nice thing. That is not something they can hear. That is not something I need to say to them. But there are other things I can ask them about, I can bring up, we can talk. And I have had some occasions where I've put my foot in my mouth and these friends have called me out on it. And sometimes I dig in and sometimes I just apologize, and it doesn't matter no matter how long it takes for us to get through it, we get through it. And at the end of it, we've grown. We can see each other's point of view a little bit more. And I think that is so important, to be able to know we're received, and that to be able to grow and hear from someone else. It's so important. And so we're kind of at the end of our time. So just wrapping up, thinking about having those big conversations, having the courage to have the conversations that matter the most, not only because it's urgent and I'm out of options and I have to do it now, but being able to avoid the situation where someone thinks I fired her because she bought stamps because I hadn't been willing for 3 months to tell her all of the things that where she was underperforming. And then finally I had to let her go. And that was just the straw that broke the back. And it was really more about communication, but I wasn't communicating well. You want to avoid those things. Also, we want to be able to set boundaries clearly. I had a client who was a fitness professional, and she had this belief that she was not allowed to say no to clients. She was also a single mom. And so she had her hours and the time she wanted to spend with her kids. But when a client wanted to reschedule and they could only meet outside of the hours, she and her kids suffered because she would say yes. And she was so unwilling to set that boundary because she didn't know how to do it kindly, and she was worried about losing money and losing the client. And so we had this long conversation, and she decided what was more important to her was her identity as a mom who puts her kid first than anything else. And so the next time this one client asked to go later, she said, "I'm sorry, my hours stop here. I need time with my kid." They totally understood, found another time, and from that one experience, she was able to do more. So I think I'm a little all over here. I'm trying to wrap up. Wrapping up's not my strong point. But we need to have those hard conversations. A lot of times they're harder inside than they are to actually have. There are ways that we can have them. There are tools that we can use to help organize the communication of it. But for this week, the one idea I want to invite you to sit with is, are there any conversations that you're avoiding that you need to have with someone? And if so, how is that impacting you? It's just an invitation. As I always say, this is just about curiosity. This is just about looking at it. You don't have to do anything different. But just recognizing, is there a conversation that maybe there's a place you could be stepping up? And maybe it's impacting you in a way that matters to you. And maybe you want to get a little more clarity on how you could have that conversation. But I just want to invite you to take a look at that, ponder that this week. I'll still be talking about courage next week. And I hope I will see you then.